25-30, 35-40, 45-50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Well, welcome everybody to the College Football Playoff quarterfinal preview show here on the Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. Along with Trey Reeves, I'm Mitch Mason. And Trey, I've got a sneaking suspicion that after the blowouts we had last week, we're due for some decent games this weekend, my friend. I look at the numbers, I look at the matchups, and I think, you know what? I think we're going to have some good football over New Year's.
I think we'll get at least two. I feel pretty confident saying we'll get at least two really solid games, maybe three, maybe even four, but this is uncharted territory. I'm really excited to explore it this morning as we're recording on a Sunday morning. A little different for us, but excited to explore this uncharted quarterfinal territory. Very excited to see how it plays out and talk about these games. Certainly big brand matchups, if nothing else. So if you're big on those, you're very excited about the quarterfinals.
Yeah, we had to put on the coffee for this one. Normally we do our shows at night. Haven't had to do a late night show I guess we did a late night show after the first round, but I don't know. That was kind of holiday week. Didn't feel all that late. But yeah, we're brewing coffee and talking football here on this Sunday morning. We'll release the episode as soon as we finish recording here. So if you're listening Sunday afternoon, Monday morning, heading back into work, I'm sorry. We'll get through this together. But yeah, I think we've got a couple of good playoff matchups ahead of us. I tell you what, man, as much as people complained, and we said our piece about those complaints on our last episode before Christmas, but as much as people said, man, we just didn't get any satisfying football, real quick shout out to bowl season. The bowl games have been tremendous over these last couple of weeks, and it hasn't mattered, the matchups, whether you have brand names in them or not. Obviously, we did the research for all of these bowl games, 40-something bowl games to put out our bowl preview guide. And so we were really excited about a lot of them. But it's felt like just about every one of them, I guess, with the exception of the December 27th matchups, which had some blowouts, a lot of them have been one possession. A couple of them have gone to overtime. I mean, we had the Hawaii Bowl go to 5 overtimes. The very next day we had what was not the Quick Lane Bowl, what's it called now? Toledo and Pitt.
The Game Above Sports Bowl, I believe.
That's right. 6 overtimes the very next day. Yeah, I mean, so what more could you want? I've really had a good time watching these bowl games and getting to kind of think about 2025, who's taking momentum into next season. It's been a lot of fun for me as a football fan.
Absolutely. It's been fantastic television. It's been fantastic matchups. Feels like we have fewer big-time opt-outs as well because of the college football playoff, because of the expansion. We have fewer teams that are, I guess, not quite in the top 4, but not playing for something meaningful. Those New Year's 6 games always seem to have a ton of opt-outs, and we just won't have that this year. So still a ton of transfer portal things that we've been trying to track for that bowl tracker, but the true opt-outs for the NFL draft seem to be, at least anecdotally to me, dropped, and that's really raised the quality of play. I do want to ask you what your thoughts are on Cam Ward's decision last night to play the first half and kind of have his cake and eat it too and opt out of the second half. I thought that was interesting, especially when his team had a chance to drive the field and he had a really cool legacy moment. But I don't know, man. That was weird to me.
Well, I think it was weird in that how it looked optically. Listen, after the Jalen Smith injury, which you and I are familiar with as Dallas Cowboy fans, for those that aren't initiated, Notre Dame linebacker that tore his everything in his knee in the Fiesta Bowl a couple of years ago. Gosh, that must be close to 10 years ago now, if not more. I will never fault a guy for sitting out of a bowl game if it's not a playoff game. I'll never fault a guy for sitting out.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
I think the issue that I had with Cam Ward, and I wouldn't ever like ridicule him for it, but I think why he's getting so much flack is because he talked leading up to the game like he was playing. Like, this is the last ride with my boys. I'm going to break all these records. And to be fair, he did break the Division I touchdown passing record over the course of a career. He passed Case Keenum. Congrats to Cam Ward. A tremendous career. One of our guys that we really celebrated on this show back when he's coming out of Incarnate Word. But I think to talk all the talk that, hey, I'm finishing this, we're going to go out and win, we're going to put up all these points, and then just to not show up in the second half was certainly a little strange. It felt like empty promises. So that was
my problem with it as well. Like, all the talk pregame, they didn't go as far as Colorado, which they did not opt out, but they also did not show up to that. But yeah, it was just really weird to have that one last ride, and he got left at the rest stop or decided to pull a U-turn and leave the convoy. I don't know what happened, but yeah, it was a good game. It was a fantastic game. Shout out to Rocco Beck for leading that comeback and getting it done at the end.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Pop-Tarts Bowl, went with cinnamon roll. I had a great cinnamon roll over Christmas, so cinnamon rolls are in style right now.
Did you have it over chili, though? Since you're in Iowa.
I did not. Story for a different podcast. That was the first argument that my now wife and I had on our first date. I didn't believe that was real. She was trying to convince me that was real. Anyway, but enough about cinnamon rolls and Pop-Tarts and chili. Let's get to quarterfinal matchups. And we've got the first one on New Year's Eve night, the Verbo Fiesta Bowl, the 6-seed Penn State, the 3-seed Boise State. This is at 6:30 p.m. Central Time on ESPN. And Trey, I think this game can be summarized as the best running game wins. I think everybody knows about Boise State and Ashton Jeanty and how well he did this year. He put Boise State on his shoulders, finishes runner-up in the Heisman. Penn State, though, one of the best rushing defenses in the country. And we talked about this as a reason why we were picking them over SMU, or at least I was picking Penn State over SMU. They showed out. They stopped the Mustangs from doing anything on the ground, partly because I think they were just effective in the first quarter, and partly because Kevin Jennings threw a bunch of interceptions and took the Mustangs in their running game out of it early. But I think Ashton Jeanty is going to be very real in this game. I'm not of the camp that Boise State shows up and they just get waxed. Penn State and the elevated competition, the 4- and 5-star recruits just make Jeanty look like some schmuck. I think he's going to get his yards. My question is, can Boise State be complete enough offensively, Maddox Madsen throwing the ball down the field, to actually pull off what is realistically an upset over the Penn State Nittany Lions? Your thoughts?
I think that'll determine if an upset is possible versus just keeping this a close game. I'm expecting a relatively back and forth game in this one. You're absolutely right. Penn State was able to completely shut down SMU's running game, 1.6 yards per carry in that first round matchup. Weather was definitely a factor. I think it's fair to say in that one too. This one's of course indoors in Phoenix, but Ashton Jeanty's been really good in these spots this year. He's had 3 chances to play a top 30-ish running defense. Obviously Penn State's a step up from that. They're top 10 nationally, but he's done really well in those spots. He at Oregon, 7.7 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns way back in September. First time against UNLV, he struggled a little bit. That was the only time that he was held under 4.8 yards per carry this year, but he bounced back when they played them at home, had over 200 yards on 32 carries and a touchdown. So I think that Ashton Jeanty can certainly hold his own. I think that this team is built to get Ashton Jeanty those numbers against almost anybody. It'll be really interesting to see how that plays against an elite rushing defense. Again, top 10 in the country. If it ever wasn't going to work, it would be in this spot against Penn State. But I truly believe that he will get his and he'll keep the chains moving consistently. I don't know if they can consistently have success in the red zone. That's my only concern with Boise State here. I think they have to have a passing threat in outside of the between the 20s game. I think that Ashton Jeanty can certainly get him there. He could bust off a couple big runs and get them close, maybe finish those off for a touchdown. But the lack of a passing threat consistently is really concerning for me when it comes to actually picking an upset. Because I think if you start settling for field goals in the red zone when Penn State can
Mhm.
just stack the box and not really respect a passing game from Maddox Madsen, that's when I think you're going to get in trouble. And I think you're going to run out of steam and struggle to keep up when Penn State inevitably gets something going offensively.
Yeah, Cam Camper is the leading wide receiver for the Broncos, 55 catches for 837 yards, 4 touchdowns. So to your point, the passing offense, not as well known, obviously 78th in the country in total passing. They're averaging just under 220 yards. So it's not their go-to, hadn't had to be their go-to, while their rushing offense averaging over 250 yards per ground, almost or per game. Almost all of that is Ashton Jeanty. Two things that I'm watching for in this game. Number one, Genty's stats. I don't know if we've read his stats out loud in a while. 344 carries, 2,497 yards. He will surpass 2,500 yards in this game for the Broncos. He can go for 30 touchdowns as well. He's sitting at 29 right now. Over 1,500 of those yards, Trey, are after first contact.
Yeah.
So Penn State has to be able to tackle in this game. Jeanty has made defense after defense look like they need to spend all offseason with the tackling dummies. He just sheds tacklers like a duck sheds water. So I'm curious to see how Penn State rallies to the football. Can they eliminate the big play from Jeanty? That's going to be a theme throughout this preview as well. Secondly, though, on the other side of the ball, we know that Penn State can run it. But Boise State is extremely gettable through the air. They're one of the worst passing defenses in the country, 108th in the country. They give up almost 8 yards per passing attempt. I'm looking at Tyler Warren, who's got almost 1,100 yards. The wide receiver core, guys out there, but I think an explosive threat has maybe been missing for Penn State for much of the season. But I look at this linebacking core and the safety duo for Boise State. I look at Tyler Warren. He's kind of that Jason Witten role, man. He's not the best athlete on the field, although he is very athletic and he can run and he can throw, but he's not going to burn by you. But he's always open. He always finds a way to shake his defender, find that soft spot in the zone, and I don't see how Boise State's going to man up against this Penn State defense. I think this is going to be a zone-a-palooza. And so for Warren to just find the soft spots in the zone, that's where I wonder if it gets to be a long evening for Boise State, if they just don't have any answers for what Kotelnicki can draw up offensively, the running game, and then, oh, by the way, you're just finding and dinking and dunking to Tyler Warren for 6 to 8 yards a pop.
Yeah, that's my concern as well, because we've seen lesser athletes than Tyler Warren have big days against this Boise State defense. This really feels like a situation. Penn State gets themselves into these situations all the time where it feels like at the end of the day, if you just saw the box score and saw the final score against a team like Boise State, against a team like a lot of their Big Ten opponents, you just look at the final score, you're like, Penn State really wasn't that impressive in this one. I'm thinking about the Illinois game earlier this year where the final score was like 17-3 or something like that. But then you see the net success rate chart that comes out on Monday morning from our friends at College Football Insiders, and it's just a dearth between Penn State and their opponent in the net success rate, right? So, yeah, I don't know how many points Penn State will actually score, but I think when they have the ball, it's going to be really difficult for Boise State's defense to have consistent success. I think there's enough variety between the run game that they have going, between getting Tyler Warren the football. Drew Allard didn't play well against SMU, but again, cold weather, weird spot, pretty good defense against SMU that started really well in that game before it just kind of got out of hand with the offense. So I think that the offense is going to do enough to keep this one at least at arm's length for Penn State most of the game. I think it'll be close enough to keep you tuned in, but I've got this one being about 27-17 Penn State. So arm's length, you're never really in doubt that Penn State's going to win, but Boise State will certainly threaten and keep you tuned in on New Year's Eve night, I should say.
Yeah, I think that's where I've settled as well. My prediction in our quarterfinal preview article that'll be out on our Substack, you can go read that. I've got Penn State 28-21 over Boise State. Similar vibes. I think Boise State can keep this close. I think it can be interesting if Boise State is ever in the lead or threatening to take the lead late. that will be, I think, the most impressed that I could be with the Boise State Broncos outside of just outright winning. And then we talked about that, I guess, a couple of shows ago. We're right back to square one with James Franklin. To be fair, last thing here on Penn State, I know his top 10 record is mostly against like Michigan and Ohio State. This is a top 10 opponent. James Franklin doesn't win against top 10 opponents. So, sprinkle that into your analysis, whatever you might.
To counteract that, he's actually been pretty decent in bowl games. Because I looked this up. I had some narrative in my head that he might not be very good in December in general. But 4-5 in bowl games, 5-5 if you count SMU last week, and 3-2 in the New Year's Six level of games in the 14 playoff era. So not awful in those spots. Where he's found success against these top-ranked teams has been in a bowl game situation.
There you go. Last water cooler stat, if you want to talk ball with someone on Monday morning, Broncos have 51 sacks. They're second in the country at getting to the quarterback. Penn State has only allowed 15 sacks all season long, tied for 18th in the country. So I think Boise State's got to get after Drew Aller if they're actually going to pull off the upset. We're both on Penn State. We'd love to know which side you're picking at 3Tech Pod on social media, Instagram, Twitter, our YouTube comments as well. Definitely let us know. Let's move to New Year's Day. And we've got the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Number 5 Texas Longhorns take on the number 4 Arizona State Sun Devils. This is the noon game on ESPN. Trey, this is the one that you and I maybe are most afraid of. And no disrespect to Arizona State, but I think very similar to the narrative that we painted last week for the Longhorns and Clemson. The matchup for the Sun Devils is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. Cam Scatterbo aside, this offense needs big plays to fuel that engine. And Texas just doesn't give them up. Now, maybe Cam Scatterbo is the salve, the ointment to this issue for Arizona State, because there's no doubt Scatterbo is going to be the most impressive back that Texas and that front seven has faced all season.
Yeah, absolutely right. But this is a Texas rushing defense in particular that shuts down very, very good rushing attacks. The best individual back will certainly be Cam Scatterbo that they've seen this year, but they've seen a lot of good rushing attacks. Arkansas, Texas A&M, Georgia, I wouldn't call a good rushing attack this year, but they're certainly talented in that backfield. And Texas has shut them down time and time again all season long. And so the defense really, I feel like a broken record when we talk about Texas, because the formula is really the same for Texas. Take care of the football, rely on your defense, and eventually the dam will break on offense. We've said that time and time again about the Longhorns every time that they get in one of these spots this year. But I feel like the formula is just going to stay the same until maybe next game in the semifinals, when they really have to maybe adjust and step up on the offensive side of the ball. As long as Quinn Ewers takes care of the football, doesn't make any dumb turnovers, their defense can win them this game. I think that they certainly showed a few more holes than I expected last week against Clemson. Cade Klubnik was able to move the ball a lot more consistently than I expected. But he's been the only quarterback to do that all year long. So maybe Cade Klubnik provided a blueprint that Sam Leavitt can follow, but this is a Texas defense that I will pick against just about any unit that they could go up against on the opposite side of the field, maybe until they get to the national championship game at this point. They're that good, and they've been that good consistently all year long. So it's hard for me to paint the picture of consistent offensive success for Arizona State, especially without their top receiver. If they had a game-breaking receiver that could figure it out and take the top off of the defense, I'd be way, way less concerned. But shorthanded Arizona State, relying a lot on Cam Scatterbo, that seems like a spot where the Texas defense can kind of just feast and take off.
I agree. You're talking about Jordan Tyson, their leading receiver. The next leading receiver for the Sun Devils is actually Cam Scatterbo. He's got 37 catches for 506 yards. After that, you've got a tight end with 29 catches. No wide receiver has more than 20 catches on the season. So Tyson is kind of the aerial attack. He's been Sam Leavitt's best friend, who, Leavitt's been tremendous, a freshman All-American. I think the stock is certainly pointed up for those in Tempe. My concern for Texas is we've watched over the last couple of weeks, their offense really have to get going on the ground game because the passing attack, for whatever reason, just hasn't been as consistent. And listen, I've defended Quinn Ewers like every week at this point. Folks keep wanting to say that he's not a good quarterback because he's not throwing it down the field. You can think whatever you want about Quinn Ewers as far as going to the NFL and being a successful quarterback, but the game plan hasn't been throw the football down the field. It's been a lot of near the line of scrimmage and intermediate passes that have worked off of the run because
That's
Texas has
Sark's
run the
offense
ball.
too. That is the Steve Sarkisian offense.
Yes, it's go east-west and open up the deep shot. It's not an offense that just throws Hail Marys, every other down, which I think a lot of people maybe think Sarkisian's offense does do. But to your point, that's not it. The issue for me, the one red flag I have about the Texas offense is they're going up against a top 30 rushing defense. And now, has Arizona State had to contend with an offensive line like Texas? No, probably not. But Arizona State has only given up 3.8 yards in an attempt. If they can stop the duo of Blue and Wisner for Texas, who went for 292 against Clemson's defense last week. And if you listen to our show, that wasn't unexpected. Did we project nearly 300 yards on the ground? No. But we did tell you this is not a Clemson defense that's winning a national championship. This is not one of the better defenses. It's certainly the defensive lines that we saw from Clemson back when they were winning championships. If Arizona State can get off the field early, if they can get off the field on third down and they can eliminate the 3-4 yard pickups from Texas in those short yardage situations, that's how I think we get to a game. If you can make Quinn Ewers beat you, that's Arizona's key to success in this ballgame. Their passing defense, it's a little suspect at the average, 69th in the country, 6.5 yards an attempt, but that's going to have to be their recipe for success. Put the ball in the air, let your defensive backs go and try and make a play. If this game stays on the ground and Texas can counteract Scatterboo by shortening the game themselves and picking up 6-7 yards a carry, like you said, this will probably be a cakewalk for the Longhorns.
Well, the other thing that I want to look out for is this is another very opportunistic takeaway happy defense that Texas will play. And I highlighted that when they played Clemson last week. The path to victory for Clemson was to force turnovers, shorten the field for their offense, and just kind of cause chaos on the defensive side of the ball. That is Arizona State's mantra on the defensive side of the ball too. They've forced 22 turnovers this year, 9 in their last 4 games. So if they can keep that going, this will be a closer game. But for my money, I still think this is one that Texas just kind of pulls away. I could see it being like that Clemson game where it's close for 2.5, maybe 3 quarters. But in the end, I see Texas pulling away. I've got this one about 34-20 Texas.
I've got it nearly the same, 35-21 Texas, a 2-score victory. I think, that game against Clemson last week would have been obviously a much wider margin of victory had Klubnik not gone bananas down the stretch and pulled Clemson back into that one. That was through the air, though, and I don't know that Arizona State has the same ability to do that. As much as I respect Sam Leavitt and as excited as I am for this offense in Tempe next year, I think they're a year or two away from being the aerial threat that even Clemson was. So I'll take Texas by 2 scores. Again, if you got the Longhorns big, let us know. If you got Arizona State upsetting the Longhorns, Texas has an 80% chance to win this, according to ESPN's FPI. And depending on where you look, this is either a blowout or this is like an Arizona State upset. But I haven't seen very many projections, at least yet. It's early in the print market, but I haven't seen a lot of projections that have Texas just kind of comfortably winning this game. It's either like Texas by 30 or no, here's the case for the Sun Devils upset. So let us know, whichever camp you're in at 3Tech Pod.
Do we know Isaiah Bond's status for this game?
That's a good question. Didn't play in the Clemson game, high ankle sprain.
It's been 10 days since the Clemson game, so that's quite a bit of time to recover.
Yeah, I don't. I haven't heard anything on that front. You know what? I'll go look. I'll tweet it out if I find anything useful. Let's move over to the Rose Bowl. And this is the game that I think you and I are both salivating over. This is the game that we were projecting going all the way back to this summer. The rematch between Ohio State and Oregon. To be fair, I thought this would be the third iteration of this meeting. It's just the second as the cards have fallen. But Ohio State, the 8 seed, Oregon, the 1 seed, the only undefeated team in the country. 4 p.m. kick on ESPN. Where do you start with this one? I think both of these teams are very evenly matched on paper. Ohio State silenced a lot of doubters by thumping Tennessee last week, a Tennessee team that then just nearly had almost everybody jump in the portal. I think they, I think a lot of alarm bells were going off on Rocky Top. That's a separate story for a separate pod. But Ohio State, I think, rose back to the fore in a lot of national narratives. The offense looked fantastic. The defense was smothering. They're going against arguably the most complete team in the country in the Oregon Ducks. Where do you start as far as picking X factors in the Rose Bowl?
I mean, I'd love to start with the October 13th matchup because that was one of the best games of the whole year, 32-31 final. And that last drive was just absolutely bananas when Ohio State was trying to drive for a game-winning field goal. You had the offensive pass interference against, I think it was Jeremiah Smith that drew that flag. You had the cheeky substitution penalty by Dan Lanning that caused a bunch of controversy and hot takes throughout the next week. And then you had the Will Howard brain fart, just absolute brain fart as the time was running out to prevent that game-winning field goal attempt. So absolute classic back on October 13th. These are two really evenly matched teams. But I just want to ask you this, Mitch. We can get into Ohio State's offense and which one's going to show up and so many fun questions to ask about this game. Who's more battle tested in your mind, Oregon or Ohio State? Because as I was writing my notes, I think the general public would say, oh, Ohio State, based on what they did to Tennessee last week. But both of them have played Penn State. They've obviously played each other. Outside of that, not a lot of quality wins, quality opportunities on the resume. Oregon beat another playoff team in Boise State. There was a long lull in the season where both of these teams were just kind of in cruise control. So I don't really know how you compare even competition or just decide who's more battle tested and who's more ready for this game, or if that even matters at this point in the season when it's just two teams on the field with the season on the line.
I think what matters more to me, maybe the layoff time for Oregon. It's been a long time since they played a football game. But to your point, I pulled up Oregon's schedule. You mentioned the Boise State win, which at the time, everyone was like, oh, 3-point win over Boise. Like, Oregon's a fraud. Listen, I was kind of in that camp. Like, I don't know if I believe in the Ducks. Looks a lot better now. They did beat Ohio State. We talked about that. They thumped top 20 Illinois team that came in over homecoming back in October. They took care of business against Michigan for whatever that's worth. Only one of the teams in this matchup did that.
Yep.
They survived a scare late in Camp Randall, 16-13 win over Wisconsin, and then handled business against Washington and Penn State, prevented a late comeback against the Nittany Lions. So I think Oregon certainly has quality wins on their resume. I think I'm more concerned about the fact that they haven't played a game since Penn State, right? And, you hear about this all the time in baseball with the new MLB playoff format. This year it didn't happen, but the past couple of years it was like, oh, you know what? I think folks would rather be playing in wild card weekend than waiting all the way to the division championship because you've got 10 days, 12 days, however long it is to kind of sit. You lose your rhythm. You lose your feel. If you were hot going into the postseason, now you've cooled off. And suddenly you have a bunch of upsets in the MLB. Don't know if we're going to see that this weekend necessarily, but I do think, for what it's worth, I do think that the teams who played in the first round, and especially like Ohio State, I think that's an advantage for the Buckeyes. They have all the confidence in the world. Their offense looked great. The defense, Jim Knowles, feels awesome about the defense that he called against a young quarterback. Completely different challenge in front of him this week as far as Dylan Gabriel goes, and one of the most experienced players in all of college football. But I do think there is something to feeling like you're coming in with a hot streak as opposed to the Ducks, who Ducks' last game was December 7th. So it's been
almost a month.
It'll be almost a month since they last played. And I know they've had bowl practices and all of like that, but it almost feels like a week one matchup, does it not? Where I know we have a lot of track record and we know we have the whole season right before us to be able to look back at, but sitting on the couch and just going to workouts and hitting each other in practice, that's a whole lot different than a top 10 Buckeyes team who not only wants revenge, but just absolutely silenced an SEC power a couple of days ago in their home field.
Yeah, it feels like a week one matchup where one of the teams got to play in week 0, like Ohio State's coming back from Ireland or something like that. And when you talk about the season-long stats, it's so funny to look at Ohio State because you look at their offensive ranks throughout the year and you see a very mediocre offense, right? Like pulling them up right now from your research, 36 overall, 16th in scoring, 59th in rushing, 38th in passing. I don't care about any of that after what I saw last week against Tennessee. It seems like they were almost sandbagging all year. And then pulled out all the stops and then finally realized, oh, we have 2 of the best 3 wide receivers in the entire country and an experienced quarterback. And our offensive line finally handled pressure and was able to protect Will Howard. Gave him a ton of time, and he just balled out and had one of the best QBRs we've seen in a single game all season. So that offense that Ohio State put on the field, combined with the defense, like you mentioned, but the defense has been really consistent all year. That offense that they put on the field last week will beat anybody in this college football playoff. If they can execute to the level that they executed against Tennessee, they will beat every single team still standing in this bracket. Because if they give Will Howard 4 or 5 seconds like he had against Tennessee, against a really good defensive line that Tennessee has, a really good front seven, they're going to pick them apart because those wide receivers on the other end are going to get open. They just will. And if Chip Kelly is willing to chuck it downfield and willing to call those plays and and the offensive line can give Will Howard time, it's going to be a long day for every single defense that they play. But this is an Oregon defense that I think can throw a wrench in that plan because they are top 10 in the country in sacks. 40 sacks this year. Really underrated aspect of their game is their ability to get after the quarterback and really their defense in general. Dan Lanning, obviously a defensive guy, he's engineered a really athletic, fast, shutdown defense up in Oregon. How many years when Chip Kelly was there, when all the other coaches between Kelly and Lanning were there, were we saying, yeah, the offense is electric, they're super fast on offense, but that defense is just going to give up a ton of points. Not so fast anymore, not so much anymore. This is a really interesting matchup because I feel like whoever executes more, the Ohio State offensive line, if they're able to protect Will Howard like last week, they could go out and score a ton of points and put Oregon in the rearview mirror, similar to what they did with Tennessee. If the Oregon defensive line wins that battle, we could see this Ohio State offense go into a shell like we've seen so many times this year. So that's what I'm circling as we look forward to this one.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because the thing that I was concerned about last week and the reason why so many people were picking Tennessee over Ohio State was that Buckeye offensive line is banged up. Here's the Tennessee pass rush. This is the best unit that they'll have faced all year, perhaps. And a lot of people were picking Tennessee to get after the quarterback, and it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. You mentioned it. Will Howard put up one of the best QBRs that we've seen all season. He's now 3rd in the country in total QBR. And I don't know what he was before that performance over Tennessee, but it's felt like Howard, Michigan game aside, has certainly learned some lessons over this year. And when they've protected him, he is one of the top 5 quarterbacks statistically in the country. All of that goes away if you can get into the backfield. Then he gets happy feet. Then he's throwing the ball all over the lot. Then you get the Michigan game. So for me, this does come down to that Ohio State offensive line. Can you hold up and let Will Howard distribute the football? Can Ohio State run the football with Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson? That's going to be a huge key as well, because if Oregon just gets to sit back and pass defense and say, nope, we're going to just commit 5 to the box and we'll stop the run, I think that hill gets a lot tougher to climb for the Buckeyes as well. But as we look towards the predictions, this is the first time that I'm going to go off chalk. And I'm going to take Ohio State 31-27 over Oregon. You look at that game that they played back in early October. It was there for the taking for the Buckeyes in Autzen. Ohio State at its best may be the best team in the country. And maybe they unlock some of that in Tennessee. It's been so difficult to get a pulse on what this Ohio State team is all year long. And that's what's frustrated me, a Buckeye national championship picker this preseason, where all the talent is there. The scheme is there. There's no excuse for this Ohio State not to win a national championship. I feel like the script is there for the Buckeyes, so I'm going to stick to my original pick from June when I said that Ohio State and Oregon would meet in the college football playoff, and I'll take the Buckeyes.
It's the first time we're going to disagree. I'm going to take Oregon. This is a team that I think has been overlooked a lot this year based on not having the big primetime matchups, not having the national spotlight. How many times do we see Ohio State locked into the big noon kickoff this year and be one of our quad boxes just by default, right? Yeah. Oregon hasn't really had that benefit this year, and I think that we still sleep on them despite being undefeated Big Ten champions and having a fantastic season by all accounts. I think this is going to be an all-time classic, though. I think back to the Rose Bowl a few years ago with Georgia and Oklahoma. I think back to some of the other fantastic games we've had in that stadium over the course of the years. I think this one's going to give a run for the money, man. I think we're all going to be locked in the mid-afternoon, early evening on January 1st and just taking an absolute classic. I've got Oregon 41-35, probably in overtime. I think it goes to an extra period. I really hope it lives up to what I'm hyping this up to be right now, man, because I'm so excited for this game. I wish it was a semifinal, but I love that we're getting it in the quarterfinals. And that's what this playoff was designed to do.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself. I'm sure this gets clipped if, Oregon wins 38-7 and all of this is
wins 38-7. That's not off the table. It's college football. Like a team can come out flat. A team can come out just totally unprepared, even in the biggest spots. So we see that time and time again. It's college football.
But I will say in the Rose Bowl traditionally, and this is just anecdotal, I don't have a list in front of me. It feels like we get some bangers in the Rose Bowl, like every single year. So I'm going to lean on that. I agree. No matter which way this goes, I think we're locked in for all four quarters. And I think that's the most important thing here for sure. Give us a classic in the Rose Bowl. And then we roll right into the All-State Sugar Bowl. The nightcap, number 7, Notre Dame, number 2, Georgia. 7:45 on ESPN. This is going to be starting at like 8:45. There's not a
You took the words right out of my mouth, man. I was like, everyone and their mother knows that this is not starting at 7:45. It happens every single year. I don't know why they keep lying to us.
Yeah, this game, if we get this game kicked off before 9:00 Central, we will be lucky. As fans, as a podcast that's going to do a live show after this, I'm praying for an early start, but that's probably not going to happen. Notre Dame, the trendy pick in this game, Trey, with Carson Beck officially out with the UCL surgery. He's declared for the draft. His college career is over. They turn it over to Gunnar Stockton. I saw ESPN's already doing profiles on him, featured pieces. He's sitting in an old school truck that I guess he drives every single day. I'm really nervous about Georgia in general. Even if it was Carson Beck coming into this, I'd be nervous about the Georgia Bulldogs because offensively, we have just not seen a ton of consistency from them on the ground. And I think very similar to the Quinn Ewers narrative in Texas, it feels like the way that you beat this Georgia Bulldogs team is by making them one-dimensional. Now you throw in a backup quarterback who admittedly has some more to offer as far as a dual threat capability. But I feel like Notre Dame might be coming in from a position of strength. Not only have they played more recently, they're not necessarily healthier. They lost a defensive tackle and an All-American, which will absolutely hurt. But the best of Notre Dame and the consistency that we've seen from Notre Dame on both sides of the ball has me leaning towards the Irish in this one.
This is either going to be a legacy game, a la Tua coming in the national championship game, Cardale Jones back when he was the third string for Ohio State, leading them to a national championship, or it could be an outright disaster with this Notre Dame defense. I really don't see it being anything outside of that. Gunnar Stockton is either going to come in and show that he's an upgrade over Carson Beck in this offense, or it's going to be really tough sledding for Georgia, because this is a Notre Dame defense that has just absolutely dominated. They've surrendered more than 20 points just twice all year, haven't allowed a 200-yard rushing game against a non-service academy, and they have held 7 opponents, 7 of their 13 games. They've held their opponent under 125 yards passing. Absolute dominance on the defensive side of the ball. But I am interested to see if Gunnar Stockton opens this run game up a little bit for Georgia, because there's been no quarterback run threat. They've really struggled to block for the running backs. They've struggled with explosive runs all year long. We've highlighted that every single week, it feels like, with Georgia. But adding that little wrinkle of Gunnar Stockton being able to use his legs, will that open up the offense just a little bit? It looked, I mean, when he came in off the bench, the first possession in the game against Texas, it opened up the offense. They marched right down the field. I think they scored a touchdown on that drive, if I'm remembering right, and it really unlocked a stalemated offense. So interested to see what kind of wrinkles they've been able to put in over a month of preparation. This is where I think the off time is really beneficial to a team like Georgia. We talked about it might be detrimental to Oregon having to knock off the rust, but I think all the time to install the new offense, figure out what Gunnar Stockton's strengths are, what they can exploit on the Notre Dame side. You know, they were most likely preparing for Notre Dame to knock off Indiana. They've been focused on Notre Dame this whole time for the most part, I'm sure. So interested to see if the Georgia coaching staff can rise to the occasion and figure out what Gunnar Stockton is going to be able to do to give them the best chance to win. But it's a tall task, man. This Notre Dame defense, one of the most underrated units in the entire country, just because people aren't talking about them, aren't talking about the dominance that they put out week after week all season long.
Maybe with an injured defensive front, Georgia finds a way to run the ball a little bit more. But what makes me skittish around taking Georgia is the drops in the wide receiver core, right? I mean, we know this Notre Dame defense is going to play press coverage, right? We've seen that all year long. And that man-to-man coverage with 2 freshmen playing corner, Trey, has been one of the best units in the entire country. They're 3rd in pass defense right now. They give up just over 5.6 yards an attempt and less than 160 yards per game. I mean, that is elite video game kind of numbers. And they're doing that with underclassmen in the secondary. But Georgia has the task then to go out and not only find a way to scheme up separation for their wide receivers, but that's only half the puzzle. For this Georgia passing attack, the real issue has not been Carson Beck. He had that stretch where he threw 1 billion interceptions in 5 straight games, and that stunk, right? That was tough to watch. But even at the best of Carson Beck, his wide receiver core was not helping him out. Arian Smith leads this Georgia team in receiving. He's got 47 catches, 750 yards, 4 touchdowns. I feel like his receiving numbers could double if we took out his drops. I mean, the way that this Georgia team has just failed to catch the football makes me tremendously nervous. It's like you've got to get open against this secondary, but then if you're dropping passes on top of that, I think that the mountain that Gunnar Stockton has to climb gets even taller. So for me, I'm leaning towards Notre Dame in this one. I think this is a low-scoring, ugly affair. You and I were talking about that before we hit record. I think this is something like 24-20 Notre Dame, and I'm going to take the Fighting Irish to get to the semifinals, and they're starting to look like a real contender for the national championship.
It's always hard for me to pick against Georgia just because of the total team talent.
I know it
but
is.
I'm with you. I think this is going to be a defensive slugfest. I've got it 20-14 Notre Dame over Georgia. I think we've been really close in our score predictions for most of these games, but
yeah.
I didn't even look at your score predictions for this one, so that's crazy. But the big thing that we always talk about with Georgia, and I got to mention it here, is can that defensive line flip the script in this game? Because we've seen it multiple times this year. We saw it against Texas both times that they played. We saw it against Tennessee. when Georgia's backs were against the wall from a playoff perspective. If the defensive line plays up to their ceiling and just absolutely wreaks havoc on the Notre Dame offense, they could flip this game. I don't think it would turn into a shootout or a Georgia blowout by any stretch of the imagination, but they can certainly play to the level where they stifle the Notre Dame offense and give Gunnar Stockton enough cushion to maybe find a way to figure out a way to score enough points to win this game. That's the big X factor to me. Can Georgia's defensive line play up to their potential and totally flip this game? Because that's what they can do as a unit.
I think if Georgia can harass Riley Leonard and take away the downfield passing attack, you get into who wins in the trenches, right? And Georgia's been a little shaky in the trenches this year. Notre Dame has been injured all season long. They lost 3 starting linemen on the offensive side throughout the course of this year. Their left tackle before the season even began, 2 since then. And that offensive line has just been solid, right? I mean, you listen to folks talk about them and no, they're not the Joe Alt-led offensive line, but they're not a liability either. And that's allowed Riley Leonard to blossom, right? I think Mike Denbrock to figure out, okay, what does this quarterback do well other than just student body left, student body right? I think we've seen real progression from Notre Dame over the course of the year. I'm not saying we haven't seen progression from Georgia, but it just hasn't felt like consistently a typical Kirby Smart team, right? Then again, Georgia's jumped up and looked super impressive when we were counting them out. Maybe not you. You've been in on Georgia for most of the year, but for people like me,
it's just hard for me to fully push them aside. Like with Kirby Smart and the talent that they have, I know I don't want to sound like certain hosts that go all in on recruiting rankings on other podcasts, but you can't ignore the talent that they have on that side of the ball, and on the defensive side of the ball especially. You just can't ignore it, and it can flip games that they should